When an aircraft is stalled, either inadvertently or deliberately, the motion of the aircraft may, in certain circumstances, develop into a spin. The important general characteristics of a spin are as follows. The aircraft is descending in a steep helical path about a vertical spin axis. The angle of attack of both wings is well above the critical angle. The aircraft has a high rate of rotation around the spin axis. It will also have a high rate of descent. The speed will be low, but possibly slightly above the basic stalling speed, and may be oscillatory. If the speed is relatively high, and possibly also increasing, the aircraft is not in a spin, but a spiral descent or spiral dive. Viewed from above, the aircraft executes a circular path about the spin axis, and the radius of the helix is usually less than half a wingspan. The aircraft may be spinning either erect or inverted, although inadvertent inverted spins are rare, as a fair amount of negative G is involved. The aircraft will be rolling, yawing, and pitching simultaneously. The spin is one of the most complex of all flight maneuvers. It can be defined as an aggravated stall resulting in auto-rotation, meaning that the rotation, which can start without the use of the appropriate controls, for example, a roll or wing drop without aileron movement, is self-sustaining aerodynamically, and will continue until action is taken to correct it. During the spin, the wings are unequally stalled. A spin cannot occur unless the wings are stalled, but is most likely to happen when one wing stalls before the other. That wing will drop, and the aircraft will yaw in the direction of the lower wing. The change in effective relative airflow from the roll deepens the stall on the downgoing wing and lessens it on the upgoing wing. The cause of an inadvertent spin is exceeding the critical angle of attack with an inappropriate use of rudder. In other words, flying out of balance. If prompt recovery action is not taken, an incipient spin may well develop into a full spin. Coordinated use of the flying controls is always important, but especially so during flight at low speed and high angles of attack. Although most pilots are able to maintain coordinated flight during routine maneuvers, this ability is often degraded when attention is divided by distraction from the primary task of flying the aeroplane. Distraction could be caused by even a minor technical problem within the aircraft, concentration on external events or features, obstacle clearance, or the proximity of another aircraft. A spin may also develop if forces on the aircraft are unbalanced in other ways. For example, yaw forces following engine failure in a multi-engine aircraft, or a lateral imbalance due to uneven fuel usage. There are 3 phases or stages of a spin. The first is the incipient spin. Incipient from the Latin for start or begin, and exists from the time the aeroplane stalls and auto-rotation starts until the spin is fully developed. This phase can be regarded as up to the end of the first full turn. A full or fully developed spin exists from the time the angular rotation rates, airspeed and rate of descent are stabilized from one turn to the next. The third phase, the spin recovery, starts when the anti-spin forces overcome the pro-spin forces. As already mentioned, if at the critical angle more lift is lost from one wing than from the other, it will drop. The relative airflow will now be inclined upwards, increasing its effective angle of attack. As the aircraft rolls, the upgoing wing has a reduced angle of attack and remains less stalled than the other wing. The asymmetry of lift increases as the aircraft yaws towards the low wing, accelerating the outside wing and decelerating the inside one. The aircraft is now said to be in the self-sustaining state of autorotation. As with any stall, the nose will drop, and as inertial forces take effect, the spin usually stabilizes at a steady rate of rotation and descent. It is vitally important that recovery from an unintentional spin is initiated as soon as the spin is recognized, since many aeroplanes will not easily recover from a full spin, taking several turns before recovery action takes effect. Recovery from an incipient spin is simpler, quicker, and will incur a much smaller height loss than a full spin recovery. It usually involves centering all controls promptly, then regaining straight and level flight when rotation stops. Every aeroplane type has its own spin characteristics, and any individual aeroplane spin behavior will depend on loading, power, configuration, and other factors. Both the total mass of an aeroplane and the distribution of that mass will influence spin characteristics. Greater mass generally means slower initial spin rates, but these may increase if the spin is allowed to progress. The higher angular momentum will extend the time and height necessary for recovery in a heavy or heavily loaded aeroplane. Within the loading of the aircraft, the centre of gravity is more significant than the mass itself, as it affects the aircraft's resistance to spinning, as well as its behaviour in the spin. A CG near the forward limit makes the aircraft more stable, with higher control forces, which make it less likely for the pilot to make large, abrupt control movements. The aircraft will be easier to trim, but its stalling speed will be higher than with a neutral or aft CG. A CG towards the aft limit decreases longitudinal static stability and reduces pitch control forces, which tends to make the aircraft easier to stall. If a spin is entered with an aft CG, the spin attitude will be flatter than with a neutral or forward CG. If the CG is at or outside the aft limit, if power is left on, or even if in some aircraft types the recovery actions are incorrect or incomplete, the spin may become flat. A flat spin is characterized by a near-level pitch and roll attitude, with the spin axis close to the CG. Although the height lost in each turn of the spin may thus be less than in a normal spin, the very high yaw rate, often more than 1 turn per second, results in a high rate of descent. The relative airflow in a flat spin is nearly straight up, keeping the wings at very high angles of attack. But, more importantly, the upward flow over the tail unit may render the elevator and rudder ineffective, making recovery impossible. Recovery from a stall is achieved by reducing the angle of attack to restore smooth airflow over the wings. A spin recovery has the extra element of needing to stop the rotation. The very complex aerodynamics of a spin may dictate significantly different recovery procedures for different aircraft types. So there can be no universal spin recovery procedure for all aeroplanes, but there will be elements common to most. The recommended recovery for some types involves simply reducing power to idle and centralizing all flying controls or relaxing any pressure applied to them. At the other extreme, some designs dictate that a precise set or sequence of control movements is carried out, time to coincide with certain points in the rotation and for several turns. That said, there is a general recovery procedure which would be effective for most conventional aircraft in an erect spin, although the manufacturer's procedures, published in a specific type's flight manual, should always be followed. First, move the throttle or throttles to idle. This minimizes height loss and reduces the likelihood of a flat spin developing. It also eliminates asymmetric thrust in multi-engine aircraft and reduces engine torque and propeller gyroscopic effects which could aggravate the spin. Secondly, although this action can be done simultaneously with the first, set the ailerons to neutral. Aileron deflection can contribute to abnormal spin characteristics. Apply full rudder to oppose the spin to stop the yaw. The direction of spin is best determined from the turn needle or coordinator. The slip ball should not be used, as it is not a reliable indicator of yaw direction, possibly being affected by its position in the cockpit. Once full rudder has been applied and held, the control column should be steadily moved forward until rotation ceases. The forward movement should not be commenced simultaneously with the rudder, in order to allow the anti-yaw force of the rudder to take effect with minimum blanking from the elevator's downward movement. As soon as rotation stops, centralize all controls, particularly the rudder, as if full rudder to oppose the spin is held, the aircraft may enter a spin in the other direction. With some aircraft, the spin may speed up slightly before stopping. Recover from the ensuing dive with back pressure that increases progressively with speed, remembering that too slow a pull-out could result in excess height loss or exceeding aircraft speed limitations, or both, and too abrupt a recovery could result in a further stall at a higher speed. Reset the power as necessary to resume normal flight, taking care to stay in limits.